Hello, everyone, and welcome back to episode 7, season 2 of the Wolfram Student Podcast. I'm Sam,
And I'm Rashang.
and we're your hosts.
This is the Wolfram Student Podcast, where every fortnight we dive into a new, innovative project done by high schoolers using the Wolfram language.
For this episode, let's welcome Eric, who will be discussing his summer research program project on the mergers of numerical multiway systems. Hi, Eric.
Hello. Hi, I'm
Yeah, so
Eric.
it's great to have you here. Can you first give us a quick intro? Your grade, where you come from.
Yeah, sure. So, my name's Eric Archerman. I go to the Roxbury Land School in Boston. And yeah, in general, I like math, computer science, and yeah, that's
Yeah,
about it.
that's cool. No worries. So can you give us a little bit about your history with Wolfram?
Yeah, sure. So, I actually met Wolfram originally in a math competition. I think he lives in Concord, so he just came to speak at a local math competition. And then
It's
after
really
that,
cool.
I joined. And then yeah, and then after that, I joined his like sort of weekly Sunday. Um, he has like these programming things where he just shows cool technology to like younger kids, and then yeah, from there I just applied to the summer camp, and yeah,
Yeah,
sort of a
sounds really
very
cool.
common progression. Yeah.
So you're in 10th, ninth grade now?
Yes, I'm currently a freshman. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, congratulations on, getting in to the camp. I hope you had a great time there. Um, just a question we like to ask everyone. Uh, what's your favorite Wolfram function?
Um. Well, I think my favorite Wolfram function, it's a resource function, and it's like just multi-way graph because I used it a bunch, but it's really nice. I think I would not be able to make it by myself, but basically you give it like some rules and then it just generates a graph for you. So yeah.
Yeah, that sounds really cool. I know we did an tier list episode on the Wolfram function repository a while back. So yeah, sounds like a really cool function. Um, cool. So let's just get into your project. Okay. So before we start, can you first give us a quick summary about what your project is?
Yeah, sure. So my project I think it's quite interesting. It's like sort of split into three main parts, I think. Well, first of all, a little background. This is sort of a continuation of some, I think, a little project Stephen was working on in 2019 or something like that. And so the basically three parts of my projects. So my project has to do with sort of numbers, and then you basically have two functions, and you want to see like what combinations of them and like sort of what types of combinations of them will intersect to give you the same value. And the first part was sort of just using sort of like number theory techniques and stuff like that to find these mergers. And then my second part was sort of a more Wolfram-y sort of thing. It was like looking at the causal graph. And then the third one's just sort of more observations and yeah.
Yeah, that sounds really cool. I love math too, so seeing how number theory gets used here would be really cool to see. Okay, let's just get right in.
All right, cool. So yeah, it's called the on the mergers of numerical multiway systems. And so first, I guess a sort of important thing to explain is like what is a multi-way graph, right? So uh for if we're dealing with just functions or a multi-way system, basically you just have like two rules. So for example, if you have like a rule like 2x plus 1 and 3x plus 1, like those are just two functions, right? And then um basically there's two options for what you do to an initial starting number, and then each of those options will give two new options, right? So it's just powers of two, and then occasionally, like for 2x plus 1 and 3x plus 1, the values will intersect, and then they actually the way the so when they intersect, we call that a merger, and then the behavior of the merger is actually quite non-trivial. For yeah, for example, like the 2x plus 1 and 3x plus 1, and then there's a sort of an explanation for that later. Yeah, so let's see. Um, First, sort of discretely characterizing the mergers with like number theory. we the first thing I did was I just
Just one question before you
yeah
go on. If you scroll back up to that section on your introduction,
yeah
that multi-way, yeah, there were like some few green dots on there. Are those the one? Yes, that image.
oh yes
So
yes
are those
yes
green dots the examples of like a merger between
yeah
two iterations? Okay,
okay
yeah, that's
yes
really cool.
okay so this is sort of the multi-way graph for 2x plus 1 and 3x plus 1, and then as you can see the green dots here, that's where they intersect, and usually it looks like it branches out, like for the initial conditions I think over here, sorry, over here, but they actually do intersect, and then if we expand that a little bit we get this sort of uh odd loopy like tree looking like thing. So
Yeah,
yeah
that looks really cool. Thank you.
yeah sure. So our first step was sort of looking at like what things can we use from number theory that will actually like sort of tell us anything about this. So the first sort of result I guess is let me see. So the first result was that if you can't have a loop of all reds and all blues. So I sort of created this as like an example. I didn't take it out of the graph, but like um so for example up here, except for this one, there's no loops of all reds and the all blues starting from. Oh no sorry. There's no loops of like all reds and all blues starting from the number one, and then you see this starts from number three I think. So starting from number one, there's no loops of all reds and all blues, and then this I think you can just prove this by just taking the. I mean this is just a sequence, and you can just take this mod 8 and then yeah. So another one was that sort of like another sort of more empirical result was that if you like if you have the same number of operations on both sides, like up here, if we have, you see the first merger comes from three 2n plus 1 operations and two 3x plus 1 operations. So there's no at least up till the 15th iteration, which is around to the power 15 things, like to the power 15 sort of n cases. There's no intersections where there's the same number of functions on one side and the same number of functions on the other side. And then I actually tried coming up with a proof for that, but I don't think, or I had a little bit of trouble with that. So that's definitely something for the future,
Yeah.
which would be future.
Just one question. How did you like, I don't know, discover that these existed? Like I understand that like you found them and then you later tried to come up with a proof, but like I don't know what step was there that led you to discover these kind of number theoretical
Yeah, sure.
properties. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think there's sort of brainstorming a little bit. I mean, that seems like sort of writing an essay, which that's definitely not math like sort of is, but I think I was looking at this graph from a mentor, and then we were sort of like noticing this like this thing. I think we had just a huge graph, and then we're just looking at how it evolved, and then there's actually a bunch of patterns that like you can originally see, and then most of them are sort of just by chance, but like there's actually some meaning as like in these two, and then there's another one later. And then where's the other one? Okay, so another thing is that because these are sort of linear functions, whenever you have like these two linear functions, like we're able to show that these like these sort of loops or these mergers up here, like these, like this sort of stuff happens either once or infinitely many times from a single dot here. So because these are linear functions, when you like do like 2x plus 1 to the function like 2x plus 1, that always results in a linear function. So it just ends up being two lines on the coordinate plane. And then like since you can have either infinitely many 0 or 1 intersections for two lines, yeah, that's basically why. And then I think, and then I ran the picture up till like 25. It took some time, but yeah. And then it seems true that whenever there's an intersection, it has to be a sort of unique composition of functions, because I didn't see any recurring loops. But I can't, I don't have any like proofs for that or anything.
Yeah, no. Yeah, I understand what you mean. Like it makes intuitive sense, but okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah, sure. So let's see. So step 2 was sort of looking at the causal graph of the multi-way system. This is sort of like the part 2 of my project. So this part is sort of inspired by Jonathan Goddard, who originally I was working on this like number theory thing for the first like few days, and then I realized like I kind of got stuck a little bit because like I actually tried like sort of some sort of like group theory thing with these, but it was a quite short-lived effort because it didn't really work out. But like I think because they're linear functions, they're sort of complex, or like they're pretty simple, so there's not that much like stuff about them. But like when you like put them together, it makes them a little bit more complex, which is which sort of explains, I mean, it makes sense why the intersections are sort of non-trivial. And the next thing was the causal graph. So basically the causal graph is the graph that emerges from like is the graph of the transformations. So instead of the states, which is like the numbers like 1, and then after the function 2x plus 1, that goes to 3. And then if you do another, like if you do 3x plus 1 to that, that just goes to 10. Instead of having the states like 1, 3, and 10 being displayed, we use the functions like 2x plus 1 and 3x plus 1. And so this is an image of over here. This is an image of sort of a letter transformation. So here, this transition is like A goes to AB. I think this is, and then here A goes to AB again. So this is a sort of states transition graph, but instead of the transitions being like the lines, they're just the states. And yeah. So running this for the numerical multi-way system looks like this. And then if you do it for the transition, it or the causal graph, it looks like this. So it looks pretty similar, which makes sense because it's transitions. But an interesting thing about this is that if you think of each of these like transitions, like because it's a like the causal graph, what's interesting is that in a transition, like none of the prime, like the prime factorization is not preserved between two states. So for example, if you have a state like 5, no, sorry, if you start at let's say, yeah, so you start from 1 and then there's a 3x plus 1, right? So that goes to 4. And then if you have another like 2x plus 1, that would go to 9. And then if you like, so if you do a 2x plus 1 or a 3x plus 1, like that, the prime factorization of the two, like the two numbers, like the one that you plug in and the one that you get out, share no common factors. So for example, like 4 and 9, they share no common factors except for 1. So yeah, that's sort of interesting if you think of the prime factorization as the sort of if you think of the prime factorization as sort of like the things that make up the numbers, because that's sort of with integers, that's sort of the first thing, right? That you think of like the prime factorization. So because it's not preserved, it makes sense that like these intersections are not very trivial. And actually, if you look at the prime factorization of like the next two, like not the two adjacent ones, but like the one, like if you have an input, then output, and then the ones that result from that output, there's actually some more interesting things between those two. So that explains the complexity a little bit. I mean, intuitively, it explains the complexity, but I was able to find a way to sort of directly link the two.
So remember, so earlier when you said like the complexity of, or like the non-triviality of the mergers. So that's
Yeah.
because of how complex the prime factorizations are for like calculating these mergers?
Yeah. So, I can't be sure to like sort of say because of, but it certainly makes sense because between transition of two states, the prime factorization is completely destroyed. So in a causal graph, like generally, if we go back to this A BBA to AB BBA, for example, like if you use the letters as tokens, you see like the B, B, and the A are preserved, right? And that sort of is linked to like the simplicity of the graph, at least like empirically. So if I can zoom in here, it's a little bit pixelated. I think I've bitmapped these out of resolution, but like because it's just A goes to AB, you see like this graph has a very sort of simple structure, right? Because the not necessarily because, but there's I saw like some relation between like the number of these sort of tokens, like the letters that are being preserved each time. And then if you think of the prime factors as sort of the tokens of our multi-way system in the causal graph, like between two consecutive like causal points, there's no like the tokens are completely destroyed and then recreated. So yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's really cool. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. And then yeah, so this I was sort of establishing a relationship between the sort of the amount of tokens that are like preserved and then the complexity of the graph. So for example, here you see there less of the tokens are preserved because the rule is a little bit more complex, and then it results in this more complex but still sort of regular looking graph. And then this is just for string substitution systems. And then later, yeah, so then for like continue on like sort of tokens thing, like if you just have 2n and 3n, that results in like this very uniform looking graph because obviously it makes sense because you're just multiplying by 2 and 3, and then whenever like you have whenever you have an LCM, they just intersect because 2 times 3 is the same as 3 times 2. But like still this sort of preserves the prime factorization of two states, so it makes this sort of more simple thing, although I can't like sort of be sure to, I mean I feel like there's some relation here, but I wasn't able to like prove anything, but there's a lot of evidence to suggest there's a relationship between the two. Yeah. And then also now, so since the paths are sort of irregular, the next thing, like sort of third-ish part where I was just trying to find out more stuff in general about this is like how irregular are these paths and like what like how can I quantify like how irregular and random they are. So these graphs are sort of the paths that the functions take to the first few merges. So each move along like each horizontal, so basically for every merger you start at a number and then you go there's just two loops, there's a left hand loop and a right hand loop, that because there's two sort of compositions of functions that result in the same number, that's like start with the same input number and then result in the same output number. So you see the two lines here, one's orange and the one's green. Those are the two sort of function compositions. So every move along the red line is every move along the x-axis is a 2x plus 1, and then every move along the y-axis is a 3x plus 1. And then it results in these sort of zigzag looking graphs. I think my favorite one's this one because it just looks like a staircase a little bit. Yeah. And then
Looks pretty cool. I like it.
yeah. Like originally I thought that it would be always true that like, the green line was above the above the orange line, and I was like, oh my God, I found something really interesting. But then I realized it's just sort of for smaller numbers. Yeah,
Still pretty cool. I like seeing this.
thanks. And then another thing is if you chart the strings. So for example, if this is like if every 2x plus 1 is an A and then a 3x plus 1 is a B. I think I use the letters R and B just because the red and blue were the colors I use for my graph. But you see, this is actually quite interesting. There's sort of regular dips here. So regular dips in sort of the entropy, which is a measure for how random and how like irregular the paths are. So I think an explanation for this is Stephen actually wrote a little bit about this, is if you take this sort of system, mod 144, which is like you consider the remainders for the numbers with respect to like 144 as the divisor. So for example, like 145 mod 144 would be 1 because it leaves a remainder of 1 after being divided by 144. There's sort of these regular dips, and then I think they sort of correspond to that graph of 2x plus 1 and 3x plus 1, like that multi-way graph when you take it mod 144, because a lot of like sort of a lot of states loop back to the number 31, and then you see like so I think starting from 31 and then 100 every 144 things there's a minor dip, although I'm not too sure why there's like these sort of bigger dips here, but yeah.
Yeah,
And then yeah, go ahead.
yeah, that just looks pretty cool. I like the results they
Thanks.
gathered. Anyway.
Yeah. And then here, and then this is like sort of my code, and then and sort of appendix. So something else I was working on was you can actually make like a sort of push down automata for this. I designed one like over here using like Thomas DeCamo Beck's sort of I used some of the code from his article, and this, I mean, it's pretty interesting. It doesn't really show anything new, but it sort of establishes a connection between this sort of Wolfram like multi-way graph and like push down automata from like theoretical computer science. And the way like a sort of a push down automata works is that you have an initial state and then there's like transformations to this. So for example, like I think you start with the 0 state and then you have these epsilon transitions, which just means like they automatically go that way. And then you have I think ×2 here and then ×3 here, and then you add 1, and then it just epsilon transitions into these two. And this sort of push down automata accepts sort of a regular expression of operations, but like the way it works to like find the mergers is that you have to sort of code it in a way that like the mergers are already sort of within the push down automata, so it doesn't show anything new, but or it doesn't really reduce the computation time. It's still like to find the mergers, you still have to just calculate them beforehand. And yeah,
I think it's really cool that you got to like, just go explore other things beyond your project on multi-way systems.
Yeah, thank you. So that's pretty much my project, but yeah, there's pretty much 3 parts, and then I think my favorite sort of part was well, I mean, the first few days I like had a lot of progress, and then like after that I was like, oh shoot, like I'm not really like, I was so stuck. And then I met with Wolfram, I think in the middle of like we had a project check-in, I think a weekend or something, and then yeah, I got some more sort of directions from that.
Yeah. I think yours was really interesting. I honestly did not know anything about multi-way systems. But this looks really amazing, honestly. Probably one of the most impressive projects I've seen from the summer program. Yeah. Do you have any plans for like future work on this, or like either continuing this or maybe a different project with Wolfram?
Yeah, definitely. So I think for continuing this, I made like 2 or 3 more conjectures. Yeah, like in my sort of article thing, I made a few more. I mean, I guess we're supposed to call these research papers, but um, I made like a few more conjectures, and I think it would definitely um be fun and sort of feel like a sort of conclusion to sort of wrap it up and then prove them. But I think right now, like the most like afterwards, I think in like the Sunday things, because I still go to them, like we were talking, like Steve and I were talking about a project, and it's just like we were talking about the like the group theory sort of approach to this, but it's like the same issue with the push down automata is that it doesn't simplify the problem that much. It just you have to sort of pre-encode it into the system, and then it's like a very circular sort of um reduction. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that sounds really cool.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So for the second part of your question, for the other stuff I'm doing right now. So I'm doing Whelp, which is pretty fun. It's like the program after this. And
Mhm.
we're doing some sort of we're like working on the synchronization of sort of oscillators. So if you have like two pendulums and they're sort of connected in some very small way, like they tend to synchronize, and there's actually a model, it's called the Kuromoto model for that, which
Oh,
sort of characterizes the mergers. And yeah, we're working on that, which is pretty fun.
yeah. I'm gonna be honest, I don't love physics, but I think that's really cool. Um,
Yeah.
I think the Wolfram language is like it's nice in that how much potential it has for like mathematical modeling. I know I've done a lot of like math modeling kind of projects,
Yeah.
the Wolfram
Yeah,
language.
exactly.
So
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's one great thing about it. Okay. Thank you so much for coming on, and sharing your project. I definitely learned a lot and was very impressed by all that you were able to get done in 3 weeks.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much and have a great day.
Yeah, sure. You too.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Wolfram Student Podcast. We hope you learned something new and took away insights from today's discussion. If you want to be featured in a future episode, fill out the form at tinyurl.com/WSP-S2-interest.
And be sure to tune back in 2 weeks' time to hear our next episode. Once again, thanks for listening to this episode of the Wolfram Student Podcast.